Corporal Rachel Hayes adjusted her rifle strap and tried to ignore the snickers coming from behind her. She was standing in line with 37 other soldiers at the military shooting range, waiting for the qualification tests to begin. The morning sun was already hot, and sweat trickled down her back beneath her uniform. "I still don't understand why they're letting her try out," a voice muttered loud enough for Rachel to hear. "Everyone knows women don't have the physical strength or the mental focus for precision shooting." Rachel's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes forward. She'd heard variations of this comment hundreds of times since announcing her intention to become a sniper. At 24 years old, she'd been in the military for 3 years and had consistently scored higher than most of her male peers on the shooting range. But none of that seemed to matter when it came to sniper selection. The voice belonged to Sergeant Derek Mason, a loudmouthed soldier who seemed to take personal offense at Rachel's ambition. He'd made it his mission to discourage her at every opportunity, making comments about her abilities and spreading rumors that she was only being considered because the military was trying to meet diversity quotas. "Mason, shut your mouth," another soldier said quietly. It was Corporal James Chen, one of the few people who'd been supportive of Rachel's goals. "Let her prove herself on the range like everyone else." "That's exactly what I'm saying," Mason replied with a smirk. "Let her try and fail publicly so we can end this nonsense once and for all. Sniper positions should go to people who actually have what it takes, not social experiments." Rachel took a slow breath, forcing herself to remain calm. Getting angry or defensive would only reinforce the stereotypes. She needed to let her shooting speak for itself. That was the only language that would matter today. The qualification test was notoriously difficult. Candidates had to hit targets at various distances under different conditions: prone position, kneeling, standing, moving targets, wind interference, and time pressure. The standards were identical for everyone, regardless of gender. Rachel had been preparing for months, spending every spare moment at the range, studying ballistics, practicing breathing techniques, and strengthening her body. Her shooting instructor, Master Sergeant Williams, had been cautiously encouraging. "You've got natural talent, Hayes," he'd told her during their last practice session. "Your hand-eye coordination is excellent, and you stay calm under pressure. But talent alone won't be enough. The real test is whether you can perform when everyone's watching and expecting you to fail." Those words echoed in Rachel's mind now as she waited. This wasn't just about qualifying for sniper school. It was about proving wrong every person who'd ever told her that women weren't capable of this role. It was about opening doors for other female soldiers who might want to follow this path in the future. "Attention." A voice barked out, and the line of candidates snapped to attention. A tall officer walked onto the range, and Rachel felt her stomach drop. It was Brigadier General Thomas Bradford, the base commander. He rarely attended qualification tests personally. His presence meant this evaluation would be scrutinized at the highest levels. The general walked slowly down the line of candidates, his eyes assessing each one. When he reached Rachel, he paused. His expression was unreadable, but Rachel could feel the weight of his judgment. "Corporal Hayes," he said, his voice neutral, "I've heard quite a bit about you. There's been considerable debate about whether women should be allowed to attempt sniper qualification." Rachel's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, sir. I'm aware of the concerns. Are you prepared to meet the same standards as every other candidate here? No modifications? No special considerations?" "Absolutely, sir. I expect nothing less than equal standards." The general nodded slowly. "Good. Because if you fail, it won't just reflect on you. It will affect how command views future female candidates for specialized roles. That's a heavy burden to carry." "I understand, sir. I'm ready." The general held her gaze for another moment, then moved on. Rachel exhaled slowly. The pressure had just increased tenfold. This wasn't just about her anymore. She was representing every woman who would come after her. Every soldier who'd been told they weren't good enough based on gender rather than ability. Mason's voice drifted over again, quieter now, but still audible. "Did you hear that? Even the general is skeptical." "This is going to be entertaining." Rachel blocked him out. She'd spent too much time and energy getting to this point to let doubt creep in now. She visualized the shots she'd need to make, The adjustments for wind and distance, the steady breathing that would keep her hands stable. She was ready. She had to be. The qualification test began with the basic marksmanship assessment. Candidates were called up in groups of 5 to shoot at targets placed at 300 meters. Rachel was in the second group, which meant she had to watch the first group perform while managing her own nerves. The first candidate, a burly soldier named Patterson, stepped up to the firing line. He settled into position, took his time aiming, and fired 5 shots. For hit the target within the acceptable scoring zone. 1 missed entirely. The range officer called out his score 80%. Respectable, but not exceptional. 3 more soldiers went, with similar results. Then it was Mason's turn. He made a show of his preparation, adjusting his rifle with exaggerated precision and taking theatrical breaths before firing. All 5 of his shots hit the target, with 3 very close to center. The range officer announced 92%. Mason stood with a satisfied smirk, making sure to catch Rachel's eye as he returned to the line. Second group. Step forward, the range officer commanded. Rachel moved to the firing line, along with 4 other candidates. Her assigned lane was directly in the center, meaning everyone, including General Bradford, would have a clear view of her performance. Her hands were steady as she loaded her rifle. But her heart raced. She settled into the prone position, her body automatically assuming the form she'd practiced thousands of times. The rifle stock pressed firmly against her shoulder. She looked through the scope and found her target, a standard military silhouette at 300 meters. The wind was light today, barely a factor at this distance. Rachel controlled her breathing, letting each exhale relax her body further. She found her natural respiratory pause, that moment between breaths when the body is perfectly still. Her finger moved to the trigger, applying steady pressure. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the hit marker appear slightly left of center. Good, but she could do better. She adjusted her aim by a fraction, counting for the minimal wind and the slight deviation from her first shot. 4 more shots followed in steady succession. Each one felt right, the trigger pull smooth, the recoil controlled. When she finished, Rachel stood and stepped back. Her face expressionless despite the adrenaline coursing through her. The range officer checked the target through his scope, then checked again as if not quite believing what he was seeing. He looked at Rachel, then back at the target, then made a notation on his clipboard. Hayes, Corporal, 98%. 4 shots center mass, 1 shot center ring. A ripple of surprise moved through the watching soldiers. 98% was the highest score of the morning so far. Rachel allowed herself the smallest hint of a smile, but kept her expression mostly neutral. Mason's smirk had disappeared. He stood with his arms crossed, glaring at the target as if it had personally betrayed him. Lucky shots, he muttered to the soldier next to him. Let's see her do that on the advanced tests. But Rachel had already moved past Mason's negativity. She'd proven she could compete with the best shooters on base. Now she needed to maintain that standard through increasingly difficult challenges. The morning progressed with more shooting tests. Candidates fired from kneeling positions, standing positions, and at moving targets. Rachel maintained consistent scores in the high 90s, occasionally dropping to the low 90s when wind conditions became tricky or targets moved unpredictably. She was never the absolute best in any single drill, but her consistency was remarkable. By lunch break, the field of candidates had narrowed. Several soldiers had been eliminated for failing to meet minimum standards. Mason remained in the competition, as did James Chen and about 20 others. Rachel was ranked 3rd overall in cumulative scores during the break. She sat alone under a tree, eating her packed lunch and mentally reviewing the afternoon's scheduled tests. The hardest challenges were still to come. Long range, shooting at 600 meters. Precision shots at small targets, and finally, the stress test where candidates had to perform after physical exertion. Hayes. General Bradford's voice made Rachel jump to her feet, dropping her sandwich in the process. Sir. She stood at attention. The general waved his hand dismissively. At ease, Corporal. Sit down and finish your lunch. I just wanted a word. Rachel sat back down, though her appetite had vanished. The general remained standing, his eyes scanning the range where workers were setting up the afternoon's targets. "You're shooting well," he said after a moment. "Better than I expected, frankly." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet." The afternoon tests are where most candidates fail. The physical demands increase, the pressure builds, and performance tends to decline, especially when fatigue sets in. "I'm aware of the challenges, sir. I've been training for them." Bradford turned to look at her directly. "I'm going to be honest with you, Hayes. I have reservations about women in sniper roles. Not because I don't think they can shoot. Clearly, you've demonstrated that ability. But because snipers often operate in extremely harsh conditions, carrying heavy equipment over long distances, sometimes going days without adequate rest or food. It's a different kind of challenge than hitting targets on a range." Rachel met his gaze steadily. "Sir, with respect, the only way to know if someone can handle those challenges is to let them try. I'm not asking for easier standards or special accommodations. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove myself under the same conditions as everyone else." The general studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Show me what you can do this afternoon, Hayes. Make me question my assumptions." The afternoon session began with long-range precision shooting. The targets were placed at 600 meters, twice the distance of the morning session. At this range, every variable mattered. Wind speed, temperature, humidity, even the curvature of the earth became a factor. This was where natural talent separated from trained skill. Rachel approached the firing line with her rifle, feeling the weight of accumulated pressure. She could feel eyes on her, not just from the other candidates, but from the range officers, instructors, and General Bradford himself. The general had positioned himself behind the observation station, where he could watch every shot through heat-powered spotting scopes. The range officer explained the drill. Each candidate would have 3 minutes to assess conditions and fire 3 shots at a target the size of a dinner plate. Scoring would be based on grouping, tightness, and proximity to center. This wasn't just about hitting the target anymore. This was about demonstrating the precision required for actual sniper operations. Mason was called up first among the remaining candidates. He took his time setting up, using nearly a minute just to get comfortable in position. His first shot hit the outer ring of the target. The second shot hit closer to center. The third missed the target entirely, presumably affected by a wind gust he hadn't properly accounted for. His face reddened with frustration as he stood up. Several more candidates went, with varying degrees of success. The average success rate at this distance was dropping noticeably. Some soldiers who'd performed excellently in the morning now struggled with the increased complexity. "Hayes, you're up," the range officer called. Rachel stepped to the line and settled into position. Through her scope, the target looked impossibly small. 600 meters was well beyond what most soldiers ever attempted in their entire careers. She'd practiced at this distance, but always knowing it was practice. With no real consequences for failure, she checked her wind indicators. Flags placed at intervals showed a slight crosswind from the left, approximately 3 meters per second. She'd need to aim slightly right to compensate. Temperature was 32 degrees Celsius, which would affect bullet velocity slightly. She made mental calculations, adjusting her aim point. Her first shot felt good the moment she squeezed the trigger. Through the scope, she saw the impact marker appear in the inner ring, slightly high and right. Not perfect, but solid. She adjusted her aim fractionally lower and slightly more left to account for the wind pattern she just observed. The second shot hit almost dead center. A perfect shot. She heard murmurs from the observation area, but blocked them out. One more shot. She needed to prove the second wasn't luck. Rachel took her time with the final shot, double-checking all her calculations. The wind had shifted slightly, now coming more directly from the left. She adjusted and fired. The impact marker appeared right next to her second shot, both within inches of perfect center.
Ace.
96%. Excellent grouping. Near perfect center, the range officer announced. Rachel stood, keeping her expression neutral, despite the surge of satisfaction she felt. She'd just outperformed almost everyone at the most technically difficult challenge of the day. She caught a glimpse of General Bradford making notes on a clipboard, his face unreadable as she walked back to the waiting area. James Chen gave her a subtle nod of approval. Even some of the other candidates who'd been skeptical earlier looked at her with something approaching respect. But Mason's expression had darkened into something uglier than mere skepticism. The final test of the day was the stress drill. Candidates had to complete a physical challenge course designed to simulate the exhaustion of combat operations, then immediately shoot at multiple targets under time pressure. This was where mental toughness mattered as much as physical capability. The course consisted of carrying a 50-pound pack over rough terrain for 1 kilometer, crawling under obstacles, climbing over walls, and finally sprinting 100 meters to the firing line. Then, with heart pounding and hands potentially shaking from exertion, candidates had to hit 3 targets at varying distances in under 2 minutes. Rachel watched as candidate after candidate struggled through the course. The physical demands were severe, and shooting accuracy dropped dramatically when combined with exhaustion. Even strong shooters from the morning were now hitting only 60 or 70% of their targets. Mason went through the course with obvious effort, his face red and breathing labored by the time he reached the firing line. He managed to hit 2 of his 3 targets, but far from his morning standards. When Rachel's turn came, she approached the course with strategy in mind. She'd spent months building her endurance specifically for this kind of challenge. She knew she couldn't match the raw strength of larger male soldiers, so she'd focused on efficiency of movement and cardiovascular fitness. She moved through the course steadily, not racing, but maintaining consistent pace. The pack was heavy, but she'd trained with similar weights. The obstacles were challenging, but manageable. By the time she reached the firing line, her heart was pounding and her breathing was heavy. But she wasn't completely spent. Rachel dropped into position, forcing her breathing to slow despite her body's demands for oxygen. Her hands had a slight tremor from the exertion, but she'd expected that and trained for it. She found her first target, a silhouette at 400 meters. The shot required absolute focus to override her body's physical distress. She centered her aim, controlled her breathing, and fired. Hit. She transitioned to the second target at 500 meters. Hit. The final target was at 300 meters, but moving on a track. This was the hardest shot, requiring timing and prediction. Rachel tracked the target's movement, calculated the lead time needed, and squeezed the trigger just as the target moved into her predicted position. The impact marker appeared on the target's center mass. Haze, 100%. All targets hit, the range officer announced, his voice carrying a note of surprise. The watching soldiers erupted in mixed reactions. Some cheered and applauded, impressed by the performance. Others remained silent, perhaps struggling to reconcile what they'd just witnessed with their preconceptions. Mason looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. General Bradford stood and walked toward the range, his presence commanding immediate silence from everyone present. He was coming to make some kind of statement, and Rachel's future likely hung on whatever he was about to say. General Bradford stood at the center of the range, his hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the assembled candidates. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the field, and a tense silence had fallen over everyone present. Rachel remained at attention, her rifle still in hand, waiting to hear what the general would say. "I came here today with preconceived notions," Bradford began, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet air. "I believed, based on tradition and conventional wisdom, that certain roles in the military were better suited to men than women. Sniper operations in particular seemed to require physical capabilities that I associated primarily with male soldiers." Rachel's heart sank. This sounded like the beginning of a speech that would end, with her being thanked for trying, but ultimately excluded from sniper school. She'd performed well, but apparently, it still wasn't enough to overcome institutional bias. Bradford continued, however. "I've also served in the military long enough to know that assumptions should be tested against evidence, and traditions should be questioned when they limit operational effectiveness. Today I've witnessed evidence that challenges my assumptions." He turned to look directly at Rachel. Corporal Hayes stepped forward. She came to attention, her eyes fixed on a point over his shoulder, not daring to meet his gaze. "At ease, Corporal," Bradford said, I want you to understand something. The performance you demonstrated today wasn't just good. It was exceptional. You outperformed or matched the vast majority of candidates, many of whom have more years of service and more combat experience than you do. Rachel allowed herself to look at the general's face. His expression was serious but not hostile. He seemed to be genuinely reconsidering his position, your consistency across multiple disciplines, your ability to maintain accuracy under physical stress, and your technical precision at long range all indicate that you have the fundamental skills required for sniper operations. More importantly, you demonstrated mental toughness and composure under pressure, which are often more critical than raw physical strength. Bradford paused, and Rachel held her breath. The entire range seemed to be waiting for his next words. However, the general continued, "There's one more test I want you to complete. Not because I doubt your abilities, but because I need to be absolutely certain before I recommend breaking precedent and allowing the first female soldier into our sniper program." Another test. What more could she possibly need to prove? Bradford gestured toward a target that hadn't been used yet. It was set up at 700 meters, even farther than the long-range shots from earlier. I want you to take one shot at that target. The very center is marked with a red circle approximately the size of a softball. I want you to hit that red circle, the watching soldiers murmured. 700 meters was an extreme distance, well beyond what was normally required even for qualified snipers. Hitting a softball-sized target at that range required not just skill, but also a degree of luck, with wind conditions and other variables. Sir Rachel said carefully, "That's an extremely difficult shot." "I can't guarantee. I'm not asking for guarantees," Bradford interrupted. "I'm asking to see what you can do when the stakes are highest and the challenge is most difficult. This is what sniper operations are actually like in the field. Impossible shots that you have to attempt anyway, because lives depend on it." This wasn't just about marksmanship anymore. It was about whether she could perform under maximum pressure, when failure would be very public and success would mean breaking barriers. This was a test of her mental strength as much as her shooting ability. "I'll take the shot, sir," Rachel said. "Good, you have as much time as you need to prepare. The entire range is yours." Rachel walked to the firing line, very aware that every eye was on her. She could hear whispered conversations behind her, speculation about whether she could possibly make this shot. Mason's voice rose above the others. "This is impossible. Nobody can consistently hit a target that small at that distance. He's setting her up to fail." Maybe Mason was right. Maybe this was an impossible standard, a way to let her fail dramatically and justify excluding women from sniper programs in the future. But Rachel pushed that thought aside. Second-guessing herself now would guarantee failure. She needed to approach this shot the same way she'd approached every other challenge today, with focus, preparation, and confidence in her training. She set up her position carefully, taking time to ensure everything was perfect. Her body position, her rifle placement, her sight picture. She checked wind indicators multiple times, noting how the wind seemed to be shifting in subtle patterns. At 700 meters, even a small error in wind calculation would send the bullet well off target. Through her scope, the red circle looked impossibly tiny. Rachel had made shots at this distance during training, but never at a target so small, and never with so much riding on the outcome. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing with calculations and considerations. She forced herself to slow down, to breathe deeply, to let her training take over. She'd practiced for thousands of hours to prepare for moments like this. Her body knew what to do. She just needed to trust it and let it happen. Rachel found her breathing rhythm, that space between heartbeats where her body was perfectly still. She centered the crosshairs on the tiny red circle, made her final wind adjustment, and began applying pressure to the trigger. The rifle fired, the crack echoing across the range. And Rachel kept her eye on the scope to watch the impact. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the range officer's voice came through, tinged with disbelief, dead center. "Perfect hit on the red mark?" The silence following the range officer's announcement lasted only a heartbeat before the range erupted in chaos. Some soldiers cheered and applauded. Others stood in stunned disbelief. checking and rechecking the spotting scopes as if they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. James Chen was grinning and clapping loudly. Even some of the skeptical candidates looked impressed despite themselves. Rachel stood slowly, her legs trembling slightly from the adrenaline crash. She'd made the shot. Against all odds, under maximum pressure, she'd hit dead center on a target the size of a softball at 700 meters. It was the kind of shot that experienced snipers would be proud of, and she'd done it on her qualification day in front of a general who'd been skeptical about her abilities. General Bradford walked toward her, his expression transformed. The doubt and reservation that had marked his features earlier had been replaced by something approaching admiration. He stopped in front of Rachel and extended his hand. "Corporal Hayes, that was an extraordinary display of marksmanship. I asked you to prove yourself, and you exceeded every expectation. You've earned my respect, and more importantly, you've earned your place in sniper school." Rachel shook his hand, barely able to process what she was hearing. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored." "The honor is mine," Bradford replied. "I've been in the military for 30 years, and I've seen a lot of exceptional soldiers. You've demonstrated today that gender has no bearing on shooting ability or mental toughness. I was wrong to doubt that women could excel in sniper operations, and I'm grateful you proved me wrong." He raised his voice so everyone on the range could hear. "Let this be a lesson to all of us. We serve in a military that should value capability above all else." Corporal Hayes didn't ask for special treatment or modified standards. She met and exceeded the same requirements we place on every candidate. That's exactly what we should expect from all our soldiers, regardless of their background or demographics. The general turned to address the range officer. "Make a note in the official record. Corporal Rachel Hayes is approved for sniper school with a commendation for exceptional performance during qualification. I want her scores documented as among the highest we've ever recorded." "Yes, sir," the range officer responded, making quick notes on his clipboard. Mason stood at the back of the group, his face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. He'd spent months mocking Rachel's ambition, predicting her failure, and spreading the narrative that women couldn't handle sniper operations. Now he'd been proven spectacularly wrong in front of senior leadership and his peers. Rachel could see him struggling with the reality of what had just happened. As the crowd began to disperse and candidates prepared to leave the range, Mason approached Rachel. His jaw was tight, and his eyes held a mixture of emotions Rachel couldn't quite identify. Anger, certainly, but also perhaps grudging respect and shame. "That was a hell of a shot," he said stiffly. "I didn't think you could do it." Rachel studied him for a moment before responding. She could be gracious in victory, or she could remind him of every cruel comment he'd made. She chose grace. "Thank you, Sergeant. I hope this changes how you think about what different people are capable of achieving." Mason nodded slowly. "It does. I was wrong about you. I let my assumptions override the evidence right in front of me. That's on me." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for the things I said. You earned this fair and square." It wasn't a perfect apology, and it didn't erase months of discouragement and mockery, but it was something. Rachel accepted it with a simple nod. "Apology accepted. Good luck with your own training." As Mason walked away, James Chen jogged over with an enormous grin. "That was absolutely incredible. Do you know what you just did? You didn't just qualify for sniper school. You've posted one of the best qualification scores this base has ever seen. People are going to be talking about this for years." Rachel felt herself smiling genuinely for the first time all day. "I still can't quite believe it happened. When the general set up that final shot, I thought he was trying to give me an impossible task."
Oh.
"Maybe he was," James said. "But if so, you just redefined what's possible. You know what this means, right? You're going to be a role model now. Other women in the military are going to hear about this and realize they can pursue roles that were closed to them before." Rachel hadn't thought about it in those terms. She'd been so focused on her own goals and proving her own abilities that she hadn't considered the broader implications. But James was right. By succeeding where many had expected her to fail, she'd opened doors for others. Master Sergeant Williams approached, his weathered face creased in a rare smile. "Hayes, I've been training shooters for 20 years, and I've never seen a more impressive qualification performance. You made me look like a genius for recommending you. Thank you, Sergeant. I couldn't have done it without your training and support. Don't sell yourself short, Williams replied. I taught you technique, but that mental toughness, that comes from inside. That's what separates good shooters from great ones. You've got something special, Hayes. Don't waste it. As the afternoon turned to evening and the range finally emptied, Rachel sat alone on a bench, her rifle resting beside her. The weight of what she'd accomplished was beginning to sink in. She hadn't just qualified for sniper school. She'd shattered assumptions, changed minds, and proven that ability wasn't determined by gender, but by skill, dedication, and mental strength. She thought about all the young women in the military who might hear about today's events. Would they be inspired to pursue their own challenging goals? Would they feel empowered to break barriers in their own specialties? Rachel hoped so. She hoped that her success would make the path easier for those who came after her. 6 months later, Rachel stood in the early morning darkness outside the sniper school barracks, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The training had been even more grueling than she'd anticipated. Long days in the field, carrying equipment that seemed to grow heavier with each mile. Nights spent in uncomfortable positions, learning to remain motionless for hours while observing targets. Technical classes on ballistics, range estimation, and tactical planning that pushed her intellect as hard as the physical training pushed her body. She'd struggled at times. There were moments when her smaller frame made certain tasks genuinely more difficult than they were for her male classmates. Carrying a fellow soldier in a casualty evacuation drill had nearly broken her, but she'd found ways to adapt, to compensate with technique and determination what she sometimes lacked in raw strength. And now, finally, it was graduation day. Rachel walked toward the ceremony grounds where families and command staff were gathering. She spotted her parents in the crowd, her mother already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. They'd driven 12 hours to be here, and the pride on their faces made every hardship of the past months worthwhile. General Bradford stood near the podium, speaking with the sniper school commandant. When he noticed Rachel, he broke away from his conversation and walked over. Corporal Hayes, I hear you've done exceptionally well in the training program. Thank you, sir. It's been the most challenging thing I've ever done. The commandant tells me you finished second in your class overall, first in fieldcraft and observation. Those are impressive achievements, Rachel nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility. I had good instructors and good classmates who pushed me to be better. Bradford studied her thoughtfully. I wanted to tell you something. After your qualification performance, I initiated a review of our policies regarding women in specialized combat roles. Your success made me question whether we were limiting our operational effectiveness by excluding capable soldiers based on gender rather than ability. We've started opening more positions to women across multiple specialties. Rachel felt her throat tighten with emotion. Sir, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just keep being the excellent soldier you've proven yourself to be. Lead by example. Show others what's possible. He paused, then added with a slight smile, and keep making impossible shots. The sniper community needs that kind of skill. The graduation ceremony was formal and dignified. 12 soldiers stood in formation, each having survived the rigorous 6-month course. Rachel was one of only 2 women in the class. The other, a sharp-eyed soldier named Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, had arrived 3 months into the course after Rachel's qualification. Performance had prompted the military to allow more female candidates, as the commandant called each graduate forward to receive their sniper badge. Rachel thought about the journey that had brought her here. The doubters and critics. The supportive voices like James Chen and Master Sergeant Williams. The grueling qualification day that had changed everything. The months of training that had transformed her from a skilled shooter into a complete sniper. Corporal Rachel Hayes, the commandant called. Rachel marched forward, her movements precise and confident. The commandant pinned the sniper badge to her uniform, the distinctive crossed rifles gleaming in the morning sun. He shook her hand and leaned in to speak quietly. You've made history today, Corporal. Wear that badge with pride. You earned it the hard way? I will. As Rachel returned to formation, she caught sight of an unexpected face in the crowd. Sergeant Derek Mason stood near the back, his expression serious. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't friendship, but it was respect. Sometimes, Rachel reflected, that was enough. After the ceremony, his families mingled with graduates and congratulations filled the air. A young female private approached Rachel hesitantly. She couldn't have been more than 18 years old, her eyes wide with a mixture of nervousness and hope. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm Private Emma Rodriguez. I just wanted to say, I heard about what you did at qualification, about how you proved everyone wrong. It inspired me to enlist. I've always wanted to be a sniper, but I thought it wasn't possible for women. You showed me it was." Rachel looked at the young soldier, seeing in her face the same determination and uncertainty she'd felt not so long ago. "Are you planning to try out for sniper school?" "Yes, ma'am. I've been training for 6 months. I'm scheduled for qualification testing next spring. And let me give you the best advice I've received," Rachel said. "Don't focus on proving other people wrong. Focus on proving yourself right. Trust your training, stay confident, and remember that the standards are the same for everyone. That's fair. That's all any of us can ask for." Emma nodded eagerly, committing the words to memory. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down." "You don't need to worry about letting me down," Rachel replied gently. "Just don't let yourself down. The rest will take care of itself." As the young private walked away, Lieutenant Martinez joined Rachel. "Looks like we're role models now, whether we wanted to be or not," Rachel laughed. "I'm still getting used to the idea. 6 months ago, I was just trying to prove I deserved a chance. Now, apparently, I'm supposed to be inspiring others. So that's how change happens," Martinez said. "Someone has to go first, to kick down the door. Then others can walk through more easily. We were the ones who went first. Now we have a responsibility to help those who come after." Rachel watched as more family members arrived. As graduates celebrated with loved ones, as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, she thought about Private Rodriguez and the countless other women in the military who might be watching. Wondering if they too could pursue roles that had once seemed impossible, she thought about General Bradford's admission that he'd been wrong, that capability mattered more than gender. She thought about Mason's grudging apology and the shift she'd seen in attitudes over the past months. Change was slow, but it was real. Her mother approached, tears streaming down her face, and pulled Rachel into a tight embrace. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Not just because you succeeded, but because you never stopped believing in yourself, even when others doubted you." "Thanks, Mom. It means everything that you're here." Her father shook her hand formally, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You've become the soldier I always knew you could be. But more than that, you've become someone who makes the world a little better by refusing to accept unnecessary limitations. That's real courage." As the celebration continued around her, Rachel touched the sniper badge on her uniform, feeling its weight and significance. This small piece of metal represented more than just technical skill or physical capability. It represented persistence in the face of doubt, excellence despite opposition, and the courage to be first even when first meant being scrutinized, questioned, and tested beyond normal standards. She'd proven that women could be snipers. But more importantly, she'd proven that assumptions should always be challenged. That tradition alone wasn't sufficient justification for exclusion, and that the military was strongest when it valued ability above all else. James Chen appeared at her elbow, grinning as always. "So, Corporal Hayes, expert sniper, what's next for you? Are you going to rest on your laurels, or keep pushing boundaries?" Rachel smiled. Looking out at the training grounds where she'd spent the last 6 months, becoming something more than she'd been before. "I'm going to do my job. I'm going to be the best sniper I can be. And if that happens to inspire others or change minds along the way, then that's a bonus. But mainly, I'm just going to serve with honor and excellence. That's what I signed up for. It's all any of us can do," Chen agreed. "But something tells me you're going to do it extraordinarily well." As the morning gave way to afternoon and the graduation celebration wound down, Rachel took one last look at the sniper school grounds. This place had transformed her, tested her, and ultimately accepted her. She was leaving here not just as a qualified sniper, but as someone who'd helped change what was possible. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more doubters, more challenges, more moments when she'd have to prove herself all over again. But she was ready. She'd learned that the only limitations that truly mattered were the ones she placed on herself. Rachel Hayes, newly graduated sniper, walked toward her future with confidence, knowing that she'd earned her place through skill and determination, and that she'd opened doors for others to follow. That was legacy enough.